Hello friends, welcome back to another episode, and today we're talking about one of my favourite topics, and that is natural fertility. And I wanted to have this conversation because I'm currently doing a lot of work in this space, particularly in women who are in perimenopause, and this conversation is for all women actually, but what I do want to say is the older we get, the more effort we have to put into preserving our fertility and protecting our biological materials that we're going to pass on. So this is so relevant for every woman who's looking to have a baby at any stage in life, but especially if you are over 35 or over 40, these are things that you want to make sure you have addressed before you try and conceive, because it's just going to make things go a whole lot better. And some of these you might have heard of, some of them you might not, but I think what's important is I don't want you to get overwhelmed and think, oh God, there's a whole checklist I've got to worry about, but implementing certain things to just set your life up for your daily habits to support your hormones and fertility is actually not that tricky, but you just need to know what you need to do. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our dietitian and nutritionist to talk about the foundations.
Thank you. No one's called me a dietitian in such a long way.
I know. It feels like a very expired title, but I also think it's important people know that you're qualified in that area too.
I'm a dietitian as well as a naturopath, but I prefer naturopath.
Yes.
However, yes, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging my
nutrition queen. You're the nutrition queen.
Blood, sweat and tears. I think starting off with some of the nutritional mistakes, so to speak, I would say, first of all, under-eating generally absolutely is going to compromise your fertility because it, A, just limits the amount of nutrients that you're getting. B, when you undereat as a female, you are putting more stress on your nervous system, which is going to compromise your hormones in terms of less production or less healthy ovulation and healthy progesterone because undereating is a form of stress on the body, and that does absolutely compromise your ability to ovulate or have healthy progesterone to then hold a pregnancy. I mean, there's so many things that undereating does, but they're just some examples. The other thing I would say is when we break it down further as far as some of our key macronutrients, so macronutrients being carbohydrates, protein, fat, and I'd also throw in fibre there in terms of another important thing to consider. They all matter. And so I think hyper-focusing on one at the expense of the other isn't helpful, but just having a top-level understanding of the fact that they're all important and why. So I'll give an example within each category as to why they're important for fertility. First of all, you need adequate carbohydrates in order to have optimal thyroid function. And I also think a healthy carbohydrate intake, which is going to be individual for each person to a degree, is a really great safety signal for our bodies as females, and that links back to, again, fertility and healthy hormone balance. Adequate carbohydrates also help in the conversion of inactive thyroid hormone to active thyroid hormone, and we do see that when people are under eating carbohydrates, it does negatively impact thyroid function even if they're adequately eating enough calories. So that just goes to show that, and I think that was at about 150 or 200 grams of carbohydrates per day. Now, again, I'd still individualize it because it's, when we're doing population research, it's averaged out across a population. I think it's more appropriate to adjust it based on a person-to-person basis. But I guess if you're in the context of trying to optimize your fertility, in my opinion, as a general statement, it's not a good time to do a keto diet or a super low-carb diet. The other thing I would say is not having enough fibre can make it difficult to be able to clear any excess estrogen out of your system. It also can, make it challenging to have a healthy internal hormone balance from the perspective of we need to be eliminating regularly in terms of not constipated in order to be able to definitely clear out excess estrogen, but also it by a few different mechanisms in the body, it can also help with the balance of other hormones because it affects something called sex hormone binding globulin, which is the little taxi that carries our hormones around our system. Fibre is also really helpful in supporting healthy blood sugar balance, which is important from a hormone and a fertility perspective as well. So I would say like aiming for around 30 grams of fibre a day would be a really healthy place to start. Again, you can personalize that up a little bit, or probably wouldn't go too much down from that, but there is room for going up certainly, but 30 grams would be a good place to start. And then when we're talking about fat, it's really important that you are eating adequate healthy fats, because an inadequate amount of them negatively affects progesterone, like the progesterone production. And also from a egg quality perspective, it's also going to have a negative impact because we need some of those essential fatty acids for healthy eggs, just like we do for healthy sperm. And then like our favorite, everyone's favorite, protein, basically just all of the things. You know, I think I probably don't need to go into that too much further because we've spoken about protein a million times, but aiming for around like 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight would be a really healthy place to start. If you were older or more active, I would err on the higher end of that range. If you're younger or not as active, then maybe you could get away with the lower end of that range, but that's again a really good place to start. And then the final thing I'll say on, I guess, the nutritional front would be making sure that you are filtering your water, because if you're not filtering your water, you know, I guess there's a few different concerns. There's fluoride, which in excess amounts in the context of an iodine deficiency can impact thyroid function. While not everyone is iodine deficient and not everyone already has thyroid issues, it's just one thing that you don't have to worry about. Also, the chlorine that comes through a lot of tap water has an antibacterial effect that's going to affect your gut health, and also microplastics in the water. So we can't control everything that we're exposed to, but filtering your water is pretty simple. So if you have the ability to invest in one, I would. And we've done a few different episodes on water if you want to look into that a little bit further.
Yes, I might actually put the fibre episode we've done and the water episode links in the show notes. So if anyone's like thinking, I haven't done that yet, you can go there and have a good place to start.
I love it.
Yes.
All right. What are you going to talk about, Amie? What is your favourite topic? I bet the audience is guessing.
No, everyone's going to get this right, I'm sure. It's the light environment. So here's the thing. As naturopaths, one of our roles is to identify the root cause of people's health problems or dysfunctional physiology, and environmental elements just are not in the naturopathic curriculum at the moment. So it's a postgraduate thing. And I think one of the blessings of social media and being in the information age is like this type of information spreads really quickly, and then it just becomes part of the collective, you know, like hive mind, if you like, which I'm so here for. But this is something I do, you probably do too, with every client. But when it comes to fertility, especially when there's cycle irregularity, or you're in perimenopause and your hormones are starting to shift, which might still look like regular cycles of an ideal length, but could be like lower mid-luteal progesterone, is getting the light environment right. And that involves getting enough sunlight and the right types of sunlight, the right times of the day, as well as avoiding artificial light or blue light, specifically at nighttime. And the reason for that is, I mean, this is across the board for our genetics and our cellular physiology, but light is a signal, and in particular the different frequencies of light at the different times of day turn on and off genes and cellular functions. And with our menstrual cycle, the amount of light at night, which should have only been moonlight and starlight, the rise and fall of the intensity or the volume of that light actually helps the brain signal to the ovaries when to develop follicles, when to ovulate, and when to bleed. Now, because we live indoors all the time and we're missing moonlight, like I have actually told fertility clients to go out and look at the moon at night for 5 minutes to actually ground their brain with where they're supposed to be.
You should tell them to howl and see how many of them do it.
Start an absolute revolution. Yeah. I love it. We'll be locked up for hysteria once again. Sometimes I feel like howling at the moon, though. It could also be therapeutic. Report back and let me know. Yeah. But they've actually shown like the melatonin obviously secretion is highest around a dark moon and lowest around a full moon. And it's actually that falling melatonin that is supposed to trigger the LH surge, and we're supposed to be ovulating around a full moon. So bringing that into alignment, I can tell you actually at 40, as a PCOS girly who always had longer cycles, like 35 days, as soon as I got rid of blue light at night, snapped straight into 28 and a half, 29-day cycles and haven't budged since.
And haven't howled at the moon yet.
No, but I wonder what would happen if I did.
Let's try it tonight.
Let's try it tonight. So it's important for monthly signaling to actually have our cycles operate like clockwork, but also melatonin is the main antioxidant that actually protects our egg and the quality of our eggs. And so if we're just constantly not producing enough melatonin, which is pretty much every man and woman who just lives a standard lifestyle, turns on lights as soon as the sun's gone down, then you are absolutely compromising your egg quality. And of course, the older we get, the more that matters. The other thing is a lack of sunlight, and there's a lot to say around that, but I'm going to just limit it to 2 things. Probably the most important one is getting morning UVA exposure. And UVA exposure is required actually also for thyroid hormone production. So optimal thyroid function requires morning UVA light, but so too does progesterone production. So you can take Vitex all you want. You can, take all of the supplements all you want, but if you're not getting morning UVA, you're not going to be producing optimal progesterone production, which we require to be able to conceive and hold a pregnancy. And of course, a lack of UVB. It's tricky here in Australia. For any of listeners around the world, we live in the sunburnt country and it's called that for a reason. The line between getting enough sunlight exposure and vitamin D production and getting skin cancer is really thin. So, but maintaining appropriate levels based on the time of year, your skin type, etc., is also really, really important because those things heavily, heavily influence fertility.
I love it. Well, the next one I would say is a common thing. I don't think people don't know about this. I think people are very aware of the impact of stress. I just think sometimes we only know what we know, and the level of stress that you experience to some degree becomes your normal, and you don't realize how stressed you are until you're not.
That's me.
And and I think it's many people. And I think that there's a few ways that it can impact things. One is just that it can impact sleep. Sleep impacts fertility. Let's leave it at that. The other thing is that, stress is definitely something that affects the safety signals in our system. And I would say that does vary from person to person, and we're classic examples of that. I would say I have a very, very sensitive brain to stress as it relates to how it then affects my hormones. And that's probably part constitution, part history. And whereas we've spoken about before, you've got a much more robust hormonal system, as it takes a lot more stress before it shows up in your hormones.
Yeah.
It still affects everybody, but why I'm saying that is it's easy for us to compare, oh, well, so-and-so got pregnant and she was in the most stressful situation. This is really not about what's the bare minimum. It's about just what are the factors that can influence things. So I think that's really important to be aware of your own stress level and the way it affects your body. The other thing is, of course, stress does affect progesterone production because there's a process called pregnenolone steal that can occur that basically means that a lot of the resources are directed down to cortisol production, or our quote unquote survival hormones, and less get diverted down to the route of actually producing healthy levels of progesterone. The other thing is that it can actually affect ovulation in the way that it can actually affect folliculogenesis, which is like the healthy development of follicles. And I think that's really important because healthy development of follicles is basically partly what we're talking about when we're talking also about egg quality. It's not just what happens in one singular cycle, but what is happening on repeat over 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 12 months, realistically. I mean, we say often give yourself at least 3 to 4 months as a bare minimum, but in reality, it's, you know, often longer than that those follicles are being influenced. And then the other thing I would say is that, so this might be a little bit left of center, but I'd say stress also, I think, impacts on a subconscious level your sense of like how safe it is to bring new life into the world. I also think it impacts relationships. For a lot of people, it can impact intimacy, and obviously in order to make a baby, you need to actually have sex. And so that's part of it in a natural conception. But I think that's another important factor as well. And, you know, actually I might just leave it there because we have so much more to talk about.
So much to say.
Yeah.
That was a really good summary. And I think you made such a good point. If people are under chronic stress, it becomes their normal. It's the soup they swim in and they don't realise the impact that it's having. And so important to address that because the body is always making sure you survive. And if, you know, a woman's no more vulnerable than when she's pregnant or has an infant, and the body might just say, it's too scary out there. We can't do both. So another thing I'll talk about is, it's going to surprise absolutely no one, is toxic mold. And unfortunately here in Australia, every second building is water damaged, and the stats are the same for the US. I suspect they're very similar for New Zealand. New Zealand's very damp and cold, and it's really an unfortunate issue of people not understanding how to manage moisture in the home, but also the materials that we're building our homes and offices out of, and the fact that materials degrade over time. And so, you know, floods can happen, roof leaks can happen, pipes can burst, stuff happens. And unfortunately, when we have moisture introduced into the built environment, it can support a really unhealthy microbiome in a building, and that can have really huge knock-on effects to somebody's health. And so for me, when I'm working with fertility clients, this is absolutely on the checklist to make sure at least the home is good, because when you have got toxic mold, which, like, mold is just a visible proxy for bacteria. There's also toxic bacteria, so endotoxins being produced, spirochetes, actinobacteria, they all can create infections, allergies, high levels of inflammation. They can cause immune dysregulation, which can lead to autoimmune disease, but also which can include antibodies to sperm, and also, you know, inflammation, higher natural killer cell counts in the uterine lining, which can affect embryonic implantation. So, you know, having a healthy microbiome in the home as well as your gut is really important. And I think getting that right also means you're bringing a vulnerable infant into a home that's going to support the health as well, rather than having eczema, asthma, hay fever, chronic ear infections, you know, all that kind of thing. Mycotoxins are also antimicrobial, antibiotics, literally. And so they damage the lining of your gut, they knock off your microbiome. That has flow-on effects to the immune system too. But specifically want to bring your attention to endocrine disrupting mycotoxins, so mycotoxins that influence our hormones in a negative way. And there's one in particular called zearalenone, and what we know about zearalenone comes from the agricultural industry, but it's highly, highly estrogenic, like it's like a super xenoestrogen. And that, of course, can throw out our hormones in a really significant way, but specifically looking at fertility, it causes fertility issues in both men and women. Actually, it can cause damage to sperm and egg, but it also is linked to miscarriage. It can cause miscarriage. Interestingly, it also affects breast milk production as well. So again, eliminating that will make sure your journey as a mother is a lot easier too. But there's lots of different ways you can test for mold in a home and in a body and its impact. But there's essentially, a checklist you can go through to see if there's evidence of water damage in the home. And there's a checklist of signs and symptoms that will also give you a clue if there's an issue here or not. And it's not something you can really address once you're pregnant. Assuming you fall pregnant in an unhealthy home, it's going to make that journey a lot more challenging. We know that mycotoxins affect neurological development. They can cause DNA damage. So definitely something I would have on my list to get right before I try and conceive.
Yeah, here. I'd also add to the list over-exercising.
Yes.
Not a great idea as someone who could
Loves.
have a gold medal in over-exercising.
Yeah.
I'm not anymore. I'm very much... I'm still an active person by most people's standards, but God, nothing compared to what I used to do. So that's that story for another day. I would say why that's important is a few different reasons. Ultimately, a lot of it comes back to the fact that over-exercising is a stress signal on the body, because exercise is a stress, but it becomes a positive stress if we have the ability and resources to recover from it. Therefore, we get a net benefit. But when we don't, and that can be for many different reasons, A, just overdoing it, B, that there are other stressors in our life that we're trying to manage, it becomes something that's going to negatively impact things. So it can downregulate thyroid hormone production, which is really important in healthy hormones, healthy ovulation, healthy egg development. It can also, it's also that we actually need enough energy in order for ovulation to occur. It's a very energy, it requires a lot of energy from us to actually ovulate. So if you're spending all that energy pounding pavement, doing CrossFit, overdoing Pilates, overdoing bar classes, whatever your choice of exercise is, it just doesn't leave enough for the other events. And then I'd also say that obviously in its more extreme cases, it can lead to irregular cycles or even missing periods. So I'd say it's relative. There's no set amount where I'm like, if you are doing more than this amount, then you are over-exercising. I honestly think it's relative. I think it's relative in terms of also your training history. I think it's relative in terms of the context of the rest of the stressors in your life. I think it's relative to how well you're fueling yourself for that exercise. And I think it's relative to your own personal, constitutional, brain sensitivity to stressors and how that impacts your hormones. Like the example we were giving before, doesn't take a lot for my hormones to be thrown off with stress perception. So for me, it'd be easier for exercise to tip me over the edge. But then what's in my favor is that I have been a highly active person and very athletic my whole life. So there's a degree of training adaptivity that's happened there. So it's just something to be aware of. And most of the time, of course, inactivity is also a problem, but I think just speaking to those people who are a little bit more over exercises is important.
Definitely, that's such good advice. And fertility is a health signal too, right? So if you're listening to this and you don't have any plans to have children, your whole menstrual cycle is your fifth vital sign. And so if you are having problems, then these are some of the key places I would start. Absolutely. Another thing that is on the checklist of the baby blueprint is correcting the electroclimate in your home. And I love going to your house because your house is just like mine. It's low EMF, virtually no EMF, and the light climate's great, and the microbiome of the home is great. And this is another area because radiation, so electromagnetic radiation, whether that's electric fields, magnetic fields, or wireless radio frequencies, it's invisible. And unless you have a meter to measure these things, you don't know that they're there. Actually, do you know I've got an EMF meter in my makeup case right now?
Why?
Because I'm staying at a friend's place.
Okay.
And I wanted to like
Get an
identify,
idea.
if there was any other hazards in the home bar the Wi-Fi router.
Are they sitting right next to your receipt tongs?
Touche. They should be. I almost need like a toolkit, don't I? Like it's like a healthy
But make it bougie.
But make it bougie. Gold everything.
Yeah.
Well, lucky for me, her home, and for her and her family, the Wi-Fi router, which is in the garage, thankfully, is really the only issue. She does have a microwave, but that is not leaking wireless radiation because it's not being used. So that's all good. But there are lots of things in our home that we just take for granted, like the Wi-Fi modem and our cell phone and the microwave, that can be problematic. So wherever there's electricity or power, there are electric fields, and then if that power is being used, there's magnetic fields. And so that's in the wiring of our home. But more specifically, I'm thinking of things that we would be in close contact with. So as a kid, living in some cold areas in New Zealand, we had electric blankets on the bed. That's like you're literally sleeping on a magnetic field. Terrible for you. I've also seen in recent decades the electric blanket you can kind of throw over yourself on the couch like it's a soft, fluffy thing. Love that idea. Horrible for your health. Also, I mean, there's pros and cons for different types of cooktops, gas versus electric versus induction. But for electric tops, cooktops, and especially induction, the magnetic fields are huge. So you don't want to be, like, I'm someone who likes to stand in front of the thing and stir and, do all the things. It's actually really bad for your health. It's usually at hip height too, which isn't great. So be mindful of that. And of course, charging anything near your body. So charging your phone next to your bed, absolutely no. You don't want to be using your laptop. I mean,
right now
currently,
I'm doing it.
Well, but it's not, this isn't ideal. Oh, maybe we should get the meter out and check. No, we won't, because that is just very distracting. But maybe we'll check after.
Yeah.
And but this has a low magnetic field, and it shouldn't really be sitting on your body. Now we're
talking about a laptop in case no one's
laptop.
watching.
Yeah. We've got our laptops here now. If you're just doing this for our half an hour episode, that's not the same as like sitting there for 8 hours a day with this thing on your lap, but it is a magnetic field. Now, if you have it plugged in, that amplifies the magnetic field hugely because the battery's charging. And with the, I guess the explosion of solar electricity, solar panels and the batteries to store them, where those batteries are, you don't want them anywhere near people's bedrooms because there'll be a huge magnetic field coming off those as well. And don't even get me started on electric cars.
Okay, we won't.
No. But they are absolutely terrible for your health. The magnetic fields, because they're a giant battery, are shocking. And then they're also full of wireless radiation with all of their navigation, all of their whiz-bang things, which is why so many people feel sick after being in them, actually. You're lucky if you're one of those people because you won't spend a lot of time in there. But absolutely disaster waiting to happen. And I guess by extension of that, wireless radiation in a car, like that's so problematic because you're in a metal container. You're essentially cooking yourself.
Having it rebound back into
back in. You've also got, and this is the same with using a cell phone in a car, it's constantly searching for the nearest tower. And as the signal drops, the wireless radiation emissions can go up like thousands and thousands of times over what it's normally emitting. And we know their normal emissions are really problematic. Wi-Fi, obviously, Bluetooth, microwaves. For many, I see women, I'm sure you do, along the Gold Coast Boulevard with their phones in their bras or their phones in their little hip pockets of the shorts. If it's in flight mode, okay, there might be a low magnetic field, but that's kind of about it. But the wireless stuff, really problematic. And one thing that I sometimes forget is I'll throw it in my handbag and then I'll carry my handbag and it's sitting right there next to my side. I always try and make sure it's in flight mode, and same in the car if I'm not using the navigation either. If I am, I'll use an auxiliary cable and not the Bluetooth to connect. And of course, proximity to cell phone towers. I'm thinking about apartments in Bondi Junction, but Gold Coast is full of EMF towers. It should be illegal to have those panels beaming into someone's apartment, but it's not. We have the shittest standards in the world in developed countries.
And you can check that. You can check how close your home is to a cell tower. I remember we were doing that when we were looking for a home.
Yeah, Refanza's website, Mobile Site Safety. In fact, I'll put the link in the bottom of the episode so you can check. You just put your address in and you can see. But essentially living within 400 metres of a cell phone tower is problematic. It's not a simple science because buildings can reflect. So, and I've even seen, I was living in DY in Sydney, and I was really close to the beach, and there was an apartment block there that had a cell phone tower right on the top. Now, there's other issues with electric fields and attracting pollutants, but actually all of the panels were beaming laterally, so none of it was actually coming down into the building. So there wasn't high wireless radiation, but it could have been. And of course that could change as they add more on, but that did get tested, and we were just below eye level and it was going above us, which was good. But generally speaking, if you've got line of sight and you're within 400 metres, that's really problematic. But test, don't guess. But that can really cause major health problems and really heavily influence your fertility. That being said, almost without exception, the bulk of people's exposure to electromagnetic fields that are problematic are coming from within their own four walls. And it's usually the modem. They're too close to it. They're leaving it on at night. Yeah. So definitely another checklist I'll give my fertility clients. And this is really relevant for every woman who wants to conceive. But as I said, we accumulate DNA damage over time just by being alive and the stuff that happens to us as humans. And once you're 35 and up, you really need to make sure you've got your ducks in a row for a healthy baby.
And I'll add to that, just try and minimize from where you are, because I know sometimes, especially when it comes to EMF and your home and all that, it can feel so overwhelming to know where to start. But anything less is better than still doing what you're doing. I actually personally, my home, I have wired internet, and I also still turn the internet completely off at night anyway. I have a microwave, but the only time I use it is to warm up my heat pack, because I know I could have a hot water bottle and that would be a healthier choice, but I love heat pack. So I will turn it on and I'll walk completely away from it.
Perfect.
And then that's happened. I'm heating it up once to use overnight. And so I'm willing to do that, knowing how much else I'm decreasing my exposure.
Yes.
But a very easy switch, if you're someone like me that uses a hot pack and that's, the microwave for that, get a hot water bottle, because that is a very easy swap out. So I think just start with the things you actually feel like you can control, because anything will make a big difference.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, well, on that note, if you are interested in learning what else can really support you in a healthy pregnancy, I'd love to invite you along to a webinar that I'm running in a few weeks called The Baby Blueprint, and you can learn everything that Nat and I have been talking about today and more to set yourself up for success if you're looking for a baby in 2027.
How amazing. Well, thank you for tuning in, and we will be back in your ear holes again next week.
See you, friends.